started to jump out of the way, and it hit me in the butt and sort of launched me over our toolboxes.
Lee Holman's dad, John, was the co-founder of Holman Moody with Ralph Moody. Lee grew up to see the formation of this company and lived through everything that it did, including up to now. So he's got some pretty crazy stories about just about everything, including the origin of the random neon paint on these GT40s that, until he just happened to tell us about this, had no prior explanation.
The day-glow thing was interesting because I had made a couple of signal boards, pit signal boards, because at Daytona, the drivers come down off the banking and go into the sports car center of the track. And right there was where the pit signal boards were. This was before they had radios in the race cars. And everybody else was using either chalk on a blackboard, or there were some professionally made numbers and letters, but they were hard to see, and the drivers are going by so quick that I came up with the idea similar to the old psychedelic posters that kids had in college, where they had ultraviolet lights, and the day glow colors on the posters would just glow in the dark. You know, that was really bright and interesting. So I did some day glow pit signal boards that had little battery packs, and they had 2 black fluorescent lights on them. And the drivers really loved the visibility of the pit signals. And we found that in our night practice that you couldn't tell which GT40 was coming down pit road, because all of the headlights were so bright, and there was no real track lighting to light the track up itself. So the pit fellows couldn't figure out what car was on pit road until it actually pulled in. And of course, you wanted to go out and motion your car into the pit and get his attention. So we took a Magniflex light, which is very like a 400 watt black light that you use to check for cracks in metal, and duct taped that up to one of the columns that held the pit roof down at the start of pit road. And I went to every hardware store around that area and bought all of the spray cans of day glow paint and brought them back to the track. And the different crews would grab a color and just paint the nose of their car or make some sort of shape on the nose of the car. Some of them ended up with just a day glow panel in front of the radiator. And some of them had something like this on the fenders, just depending upon which team did what and who had time to paint what. But at night, you could tell what Mark II was coming down pit road because of that day glow. And they kept it on the cars. And at our pits, we used a black light always to help at night.
So you put that big Magniflex light at the beginning of pit road?
Yeah.
Did you ask anybody before you did that, or you just go tape that thing?
Just tape it up there, you know.
And no one was like, what is that for?
Well, it's funny. It's a little handheld thing that's about this big around. It was more like you'd have a fog light on a boat or something. It was about that size, but it was a really high wattage bulb. Typically, for Magniflexing, you had a fluorescent material that was magnetic, and you'd put the piece of metal in this machine that would put a magnetic field around the part, and that would suck this fluorescent goo down into the cracks. And you'd then take that into a dark room with this Magniflex light, and you could see where there was a line or a crack. It just so happened that it works with day glow paint as well. So.
How old were you when you were?
I was 21.
Wow.
Well, actually, yeah, 21.
Now that'd be kind of turned into part of the iconic look of these cars to have the cars on the table,
the panels, yeah,
the bright fenders.
The one trouble with day glow paint, now that the guys are vintage racing and maintaining the cars, it is very susceptible to the sun.
Yeah.
And it fades rapidly. If you put fresh, on the gold car, they'd put fresh pink Day-Glo paint on the nose of it, and in 30 days it would turn chalky white because the UV light and sunlight destroys that paint.
After you did that first pit board thing at the Daytona race, did other teams see that and start copying you?
I don't know, because we only did we did 66 and 67, and then we quit. But right along in 67, they started coming up with the number dots that glowed. They came out with the fluorescent panels that you could pop rivet on the side of the car and paint your number in black over the dot like they have now. And so our period of having an advantage went away pretty quick when they started doing the fluorescent emblems on the side of the car.
Huh. What was your job on pit road?
I'd never got on pit road because I was over on the pit signal area. And Wes Moss, our engineer for Holman and Moody, he and I sat over in the little pit signal area for the full 24 hours. And it was memorable because that year it got down to like 28 degrees at Daytona. And we froze our butts off. It was absolutely miserable. But, you know, we were doing it for the race, so we were there for the 24 hours.
Where was the pit signal area relative to pit road?
Really kind of behind pit road, because pit road is on the front straightaway or the dog leg, and then they come in the track and go down. So we were probably 200 yards, 300 yards away from the pits, but kind of behind that area.
So it's like in that first left-hand turn when you start to go into the infield.
It's kind of a two-stage thing, and we're in the third or the second stage of that turn.
Did somebody walk over and tell you what to do because there was no radio, or did you guys have radios in the pits?
No, we didn't have any communication, but somebody would run a note over to us to say this or that, and we'd pull the numbers out because the numbers had all been pre-made, they'd all been die cut, and then painted. And so we'd pick out the numbers for the car and what you wanted to tell them, the lap time or come in, or you know, what position they were in in the race or whatever.
So in my head, when you first told the story, I thought when you said pit signal board, I thought you were talking about, like, I'm thinking about NASCAR with the thing on the arm that comes down to, like, it signified the pit stall.
Yeah, no,
we'd go
holding
it.
Yeah, we'd go hold it up and let the driver read it as he went past.
Okay, so this thing was to relay messages to the driver, not to tell them where the pit stall was.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was telling them where the pit stall was. That makes sense.
No, we were around on the back, and it's the same thing at Le Mans. At Le Mans, they did it a different way. The only place on the track that they were slow enough to read was what they call pit signal corner, which was at the end of the Mulsanne straightaway. And there was a telephone in each pit that was connected to a landline telephone in an appropriate box at pit signal area, so that the Ford team could call a guy and he would do the numbers or do whatever and then hold it up as the drivers went by. Because at Le Mans, the cars would come over the Mulsanne jump, get airborne or unweighted, come down, and they would have about an eighth of a mile to go from 220 to 35 miles an hour for a hard 90-degree corner at what was called pit signal corner. And that's where the cars were going slow enough that the drivers could actually look at a sign and read it.
So they were having to take the tightest, most aggressive spot on the track and read a board.
Well, yeah, pretty much, yeah. Yeah. But once they were set up and slowed down, they could look around a little bit. And it must have been confusing for the drivers because it was hard to see, and they were fairly busy trying to gear down and brake and make the corner. And there were a number of people that didn't make the corner, and the French had piled sand burns on the outside of the track that were about as high as this table, 30 inches off the floor. So there were occasions that cars would pile into the sand and just get stuck up on the sand on the far side of the track from pit signal area. And there's a lot of videos of guys there with shovels trying to dig their Ferraris out of the sand.
You could put a pin in any point of time where the world and the climate of motorsports racing in general was the best. Like, when did all of that peak in your mind from all the decades that you've witnessed or been involved in racing?
To my mind, the late 60s would have been the heyday for all of that. It was very competitive in NASCAR, very competitive in drag racing, and there was enough driver safety that the chances of the drivers being severely injured or killed in the racing had been diminished greatly. Because you think about the early 60s or late 50s, they didn't have seat belts. They didn't want seat belts because they didn't have fuel cells. And it was better to get thrown out of a flipping car than it was to be stuck in it with seat belts. Because you were sure that there was going to be a fire, because the gas tanks, the fuel tanks, and all those things were just aluminum containers welded up, and the safety of it, suddenly having seat belts and fuel cells and that made racing so much safer, and it was kind of nice being able to have drivers live through the event.
Speaking of seatbelts, in the last video we did with you in this room, you showed us Fireball Robert's seatbelt buckle that was sitting on this table. So anybody listening to this needs to go look at that. You got a lot of crazy artifacts in here.
It was funny at Le Mans. Because you had the horrible accident where the Mercedes went into the crowd on the main straightaway directly across from pit road and killed 40, 50 people in one accident, spectators. It's one thing if a driver or a mechanic is injured, but the spectator safety is the primary importance. You can't injure the fans. They're just not to be done. And so it was a learning curve. Lately on YouTube, last night in fact, I watched a number of the old 1920s races in France, and they had the first Le Mans in 1906. The French Grand Prix, and they had videos of all that, and there were spectators standing on the racetrack. It seems to be a bit foolish, or standing on the outside of a corner, that the race cars would get out of control and flip up onto the track. It was pretty educational to see. I thought what we did was scary compared to the safety features they have now. When we were at Le Mans, there was no pit wall. The safety barrier between the racetrack and our car in the pits that we were working on was a painted line. And you had the racetrack on that side of the line and the pits on this side of the line. And so right over here, a car's doing 180, and we're working on a car, fueling a car that stopped on the road, you know, and heaven forbid they should cross that painted line, you know. It's just not much of a safety barrier.
Did that ever happen? Did you, like,
oh yeah.
Did you ever watch cars get plowed on when they were sitting in their pit stall?
Oh yeah. At Darlington, I was helping hold the gas cans and stuff, and a car wrecked and spun into our pits, and I started to jump out of the way, and it hit me in the butt and sort of launched me over our toolboxes. So yeah, in all forms of racing, there was a hazard, and that's why suddenly you have pit walls and barriers and speed limits on pit road. They tend to do the least amount of thinking about it until somebody's injured or somebody dies in an accident, and then suddenly we've got to change all the rules and get some protection and get this sorted out. And that's how innovation comes around. We had one driver hopped in a drag car to do a test run, and he sat on his seatbelts and lost control of the car, and it killed him. But he was running the car at full speed. All he had to do was put on his seatbelts, and he just couldn't be bothered. Just sat down on top of them and went out and did a run, and a tire blew, and he was lost. So some of these guys think they're immortal and that they're not about to get injured. If you really thought you were going to get injured, you probably wouldn't get in the car, but most of them don't think that that's going to happen to them.
Was it a big, culture shock to change from racing in Le Mans versus racing in NASCAR? It
was. I enjoyed the sports car racing because I thought the racing was more challenging. And even in NASCAR, I preferred Riverside or Watkins Glen.
Road courses were more fun.
Yeah, that you had more talent, and the driving itself was more difficult. But it really is a case of there's a mindset that you're a racer. And there are people that just have to have that competition. They have to have that push, if you will, to go race. And it's funny. Fred Lorenzen is mercifully still alive and in a nursing home because he has lost some of his memory. But the last time I saw him, he might not know what he was had for lunch that day, but he could tell you what tire blew at what lap on what racetrack. His memory of the racing was still there. And so many of these guys can tell you that, on the 50th lap at Darlington or whatever, what race and what year, everything in their mind is logicked by the racing, because that was the important part of their life.
Sometimes there are things that you never had a question about until you have an answer for it, and then you're like, wow, I never even thought of that. Didn't know how that originated. That's really cool. It's just one of those fascinating things you wouldn't even think to ask for. Then a guy like Lee just tells you, and that's awesome. If you enjoyed that, make sure you're subscribed for more, because we have probably 3 hours of footage with Lee just talking about all kinds of stuff, among lots of other things that you can find in the Racing History Nerd Zone playlist. If the information in this video had you fully engaged and you're still here and you haven't checked out yet, then you would love the other videos that we have posted already. It doesn't matter how old they are, we make them with the intent to be watched for the rest of forever. So even if you're watching this video right now and it's not 3 days after it's posted, if you leave a comment, it's very possible that I'm going to answer it, because I try to answer everything. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check out stablesandautoworks.com to find hats and shirts, stickers, kind of like the hat I'm wearing right now. A lot of it's like vintage themed. This is stuff we like. If you don't, that's fine, but it's there and you might like it, so check it out.